I thought the last time I checked in on liberals that their whole argument was basically that it's like a living constitution and all this stuff. And, you know, the Supreme Court is I guess has like a different lens with which to read things. And now they're acting like they're the ones who are the originalists and they're the ones who are into law and order. I don't know if that's just because of January 6th or whatever. They're trying to act like that's their thing. He was talking about that case.
All right, so let me touch on the first part first, then I'll get to the J6 case. So you raised a very interesting point there that I wanted to explain for the viewers and listeners a little bit, which is the left for decades now has failed to come up with any kind of viable alternative to constitutional originalism. They sometimes call it living constitutionalism. That was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's rough term. But Stephen Breyer, who retired from the court in 2022, his new thing is like judicial pragmatism. You know, they're all over the map. You know, some leading liberal theorists, such as, I guess I'll nerd out for a second here. I mean, Jack Balkin at Yale Law School, Larry Solomon at UVA Law School. There are certain law professors who essentially espouse what they refer to as progressive originalism, which may sound oxymoronic because it frankly kind of is. But the point is that they're not unified as to what their counter to originalism on the right is. They have largely failed to do so. In fact, as Elena Kagan famously said at her Senate Judiciary Confirmation hearing about 10, 15 years ago or so, she famously said, "We're all originalists now," in response to an interesting question from a U.S. senator. So they have failed, and increasingly they actually are trying to kind of do the whole like we're the true originalist thing. You know, sometimes their opinions don't exactly read like that. Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent in the affirmative action case last year certainly did not read to me like an originalist opinion, to put it mildly there. But anyway, that's kind of what's going on there, is that they have failed so clearly to come up with any kind of viable alternative to the right's predominant in methodology of constitutional interpretation that at this point they're increasingly kind of coming to this idea of, we're actually the true interpreters of the Constitution. It's farcical. No one's buying it, but that's what's going on there.
Is it that they've changed the name, but they've not actually changed the way that they're coming up with their decisions, right? Like they just want to call themselves originalists, but it's not. Whereas before they were kind of like, oh, we don't need to even pretend like we are originalists. Is that kind of what the shift was?
Yeah, I think it's part of that. Look, I guess I will give like the slightest modicum of credit and say that for the most part, even liberal jurisprudence these days, when you're interpreting the Constitution or a statute, will typically start with the words of the statute or Constitution. And, people are like, oh, my God, what's the alternative? Well, believe it or not, actually, 50, 60 years ago, during the days of the Warren Court in the 1960s, the very freewheeling days back then, it was actually customary to essentially not even start with the text, to basically look at like the legislative history.